This is GitMinutes episode 10, the second part from the Git Merge conference in Berlin. GitMinutes is a show for proficient Git users featuring stories, discussions, ideas, demos, and other things useful for those using Git today. I'm your host, Thomas Ferris Nicolaisen, and you can find more information about the show on gitminutes.com. This episode is recorded on the 10th of May 2013, and the show notes are available on links.gitminutes.com/10. This is another episode from Git Merge. It is still the second day of the conference, also known as User Day. It's in the afternoon, and I get around to interviewing 3 more people before the end of the day. The first of these is Scott Chacon of GitHub, who, in spite of being down with the cold, he organized the conference and was able to do an interview for the show. And the next part is a conversation with Mislav Maronic about many things Git. And finally, I talked to Thomas Rast, who is another Git core contributor. So here we go. So I'm standing here with Scott Chacon. Scott, why don't you just tell us who you are and what you're doing here?
Sure. So I'm one of the GitHub co-founders. So GitHub is putting on this event, and so like I've written the Pro Git book, and I maintain the gitsem.com website. So I've been involved in the Git community for a long time now.
Yeah, and Git Merge, seemed like a conference that just popped out of nowhere for me. I didn't notice it until one of my guests on the show asked me if I was going there, and I was like, "Whoa, what's this? Oh, cool, in Berlin. Okay." So why did you arrange this conference? And
I participated in the Git Together, which was held in Mountain View after the Google Summer of Code Mentor Summit.
Yeah.
Every year, I think, for the last couple of years. And there was some difficulties getting it going this year, and we felt for a while that it would be useful to do one in Europe rather than just in North America every year. So, a couple of us sort of thought it would be a good idea to do a sort of get together, but I didn't want to name it the Get Together because that's sort of been the Google conference for a while. So we thought it'd be fun to come out to throw the first one in Berlin and just do sort of a loosely organized conference, almost an unconference. The day was mostly lightning talks and birds of a feather type sessions and small group meetings, and so we thought it'd be really fun to come to Berlin, which had actually one of the first get-togethers a long time ago. It was the Friends of Git conference, and there was just 15 people or something. So we thought it'd be awesome to come back to do that, and I'd actually really like to make a series out of it. So we've been talking about having another one in the Bay Area sometime late this year for people in North America that can come or have an easier time getting there. And then maybe moving it around Europe and North America for a while, and then if we can to even be able to do it in other places. There's a lot of Git developers in South America, so right now there's a lot of core developers in Europe and North America, so it makes sense to do it there. But as we get a feel for what we're trying to get out of the conference and how well it goes, and have a better sort of formula for having everybody get a lot out of the conference, I think we can start expanding it a little bit more.
Being in a company who's trying to, I don't know the right word, but kind of to forward an open source community,
yeah.
It's might be easy to get that wrong as a company. I can kind of imagine, Oracle pushing the Java community or Microsoft pushing their developers. How do you go about fostering it, the Git community?
Well, I don't know. I don't know that we want to see what the Git community needs and try to provide that in a way that's not sort of heavy-handed as much as possible. So I've tried relatively hard to keep GitHub out of this conference as much as possible, so that it's not the GitHub conference. But that it is very specifically a Git conference that we help to facilitate in whatever way is best to the Git community. Because ultimately, this is not about trying to get people here to use GitHub. It's not important to me whether people here are using GitHub. It's important to me whether people here are using Git and using it well, and that we understand as GitHub, what problems are the most important to Git developers, what they can't do well right now, there were a lot of talks about tools and stuff that people have started working on. So, like, I want to understand why they're writing those tools, like what issues they're running into that Git is not solving for them that they have to do something else for, and like why that is. And in some cases, it might be useful for GitHub to develop that functionality for people so that they don't have to download a Python script or something to do it. That we can provide some solution to that. But it's never about, like, none of this is about I want people at this conference to use GitHub more. It's about, like, we really want the Git community to be better and healthier and to understand it so that for the people that do use GitHub, that we can provide better solutions for them, right? And there's a lot of GitHub employees here, and I think it's like I've come to a lot of these get-togethers, but a lot of other GitHubbers have not. So I think it's really useful for them to meet people in Europe that use Git, which is not really it's not really what they encounter every day, right? It's not like living in San Francisco or living in wherever everybody lives. There's people from all over the world actually here that are GitHubbers. I think it's useful to be able to talk to everybody and say, okay, this is what other people using Git are running into, and problem sets we may not be considering fully, right?
Do you think, or can you in any way generalize and say that the Europeans are a bit different in their community way of being, in any sense?
I don't know. Well, I mean, I honestly don't know that I can say that just because my experience in like knowing developers and meeting developers in general, I think that this is not much different than other developer communities in Europe, but I've spent a lot of time in developer communities in Europe doing, conference talks and stuff, and so, like, I don't know that it's, and even when I go to conferences in the United States, there's a lot of Europeans there, so I always kind of see it as the same basic developer community, rather than, Europeans and Americans or something like that. But it definitely is a very, especially in Berlin, is one of my favorite places to go. So that's partially why we held it here as well, is we know a lot of developers in Berlin, and we're good friends with a lot of them, and we know there's a huge Git user base and GitHub base in Germany generally, but in Berlin specifically. So we thought it would be a good place to start it. And there has been a great turnout, and there's a lot of core contributors here, and I think it's been really helpful for everybody.
What is some of the main concrete things that you found yesterday or today that you're going to take with you home from this conference?
There were a number of things. I've been keeping notes on all of the speakers that have gone up and trying to put all of their tools down. The iMerge stuff that was presented, I think, was very interesting. I'm not sure that it'll come to something concretely due to something I was doing, but it was interesting to think about how to come up with an easier way for people to do sort of bad merges or merges that are problematic, and thinking about that in different ways. And so that's something that GitHub, I think does not help people with very much right now, is helping them do merges. We really kind of push that off onto the user and say do it locally if we have if it's anything other than trivial. So I think looking at making that easy and having that be a good experience, if people are doing merges in the browser and we can provide really good merge tools, I think that it's a really compelling idea. And so talking about that and seeing what people are trying to do to solve that problem is interesting to me. So that's one. I also talked to some of the core developers about about how, the gitsem.com website. That's really more of a personal thing than a GitHub thing, in that I maintain the website generally, and I'm largely responsible for it. So stuff like trying to provide, it's a user portal right now, not a developer portal. So there's no tools on gitsem.com that help the actual people that develop Git work better. I think it might be interesting to try to do that, to supplement Gmain for having URLs for emails, or correlating them to, or connecting them to actual commits that the patch series ended up in, and there's a lot of interesting data that I think is hard to find right now. It's largely in people's sort of personal mutt inboxes, on their computers, and so if you don't have the 2 gig history of all of the Git mailing list inbox, it's really hard to find that data otherwise. So that's kind of inspired me to see if maybe tomorrow during the hack day I can I can take all of that data and like put it in Elasticsearch or something and come up with some interesting ways of being able to extract data out of it that might be useful to new developers in Git. So those are two that come up on the top of my head, but in general, it's been fascinating to kind of see. There's been a lot of usage of libgit 2 that I didn't really know about that well, even though, like, technically they're working with a lot of GitHub people. I hadn't personally seen like the Visual Studio integration. I hadn't seen that done live. A lot of the other GitHub people I think hadn't seen that done live, so it was interesting to see what that is. The IntelliJ IDE, there's a lot of IDE integrations that the Xcode stuff actually was really compelling. So even though it has Git stuff built in, there was some GitHub functionality that somebody had hacked onto it. So there's a lot of stuff that I thought was really interesting. I think it was helpful.
Cool. Well, Scott, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Standing here with Mislav
Marochnic.
Exactly. It's easier to find you on Twitter. It's simply Mislav. And so let's just ask, who are you, first of all?
Mostly a web developer, huge Ruby geek, huge JavaScript geek, doing a lot of open source projects, huge Git geek as well.
Yeah.
Did some random blog posts on the subject, which turned out to be popular a lot. Mm-hmm. And have been teaching Git in some of the companies I worked as a consultant. So did some Git training. So it's definitely one of my bigger interests since like half of my shell scripts in my private working environment on my laptop are something relating to Git, something relating to the Git workflow. So I guess it's a hobby of mine.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny, or a recurring thing is like, why do you think people get so, passionate about, using Git that it becomes their hobby? I mean, it's just a version control system. It's like what I keep hearing.
I think it's the same as with JavaScript, right? A lot of people are just passionate about JavaScript, and when it came like in a very viable implementation to the server side as well, for instance, Node.js, people went crazy about it. And why? I mean, it works well and it's pretty fast and everything, but it wasn't just that. It was just something about the language, right? Mm-hmm. So JavaScript is it's not extremely low level. I would offend some programmers in other languages, which actually are low level. But comparing to some other scripting languages, it is kind of low level in the way that it's like it just gives you building blocks, like basic of things, but it doesn't give you a lot of tooling, doesn't give you a lot of direction by itself. Mm. And the community and you yourself have to invent a lot of things.
Yeah.
So to geeks, it's as if you give a bunch of Legos and say to them, hey, play around with this. And I think that's what's appealing, the hackability of this, right? So, for instance, in JavaScript, you would see that people are trying to implement like class-based inheritance, which doesn't exist in there, but they know it from other places, so they want to implement it in there. So I guess with Git, which is also extremely low level, people know of some concepts about something they want to do with version control, the way they think about that, and they have these building blocks, and they can implement that, and they do this. Mm. And we see whole GitHub and everything which grew out of that with pull requests and a lot of things that we now consider ubiquitous in the Git world is actually just spawned out of ideas about capturing a certain workflow and didn't exist before as a solid thing.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, this strength is also, I wouldn't say a weakness, but it's maybe a criticism that people are saying, that Git has too many moving pieces. I don't want to use it in my company because it's too complicated, and every time I ask something on a mailing list, I get like a different answer. 3 different ways of doing any command in Git, etc. How do you think we should handle that criticism?
I think it's right on spot, and everybody who says that Git is hard to learn is correct, because if you have tons of people who are trying to learn Git saying it's hard to learn, that means that it's hard to learn, because people are not lying about things. And these are smart people. These are people who probably know how to develop in some other things. So I guess also, designers in other companies also required to use Git. But let's talk about like developers who maybe in the past use another version control system. They know programming languages, they know how to use the computer very well and the tooling in there, and they still struggle with learning Git. And I still struggle with some of the Git concepts, because when I see some of the Git core guys being able to just traverse manually the objects internally stored in Git, and can commit to a branch without using Git commit, but just manually, that's extremely hardcore, and I wouldn't know how to do that by heart. So I'm definitely not there yet at this level of understanding everything that happens internally. But I picked a level that I want to remain on, just to be able to, continue sanely using it. And I don't think it will be productive to go further than that, because otherwise, if I'm not going to contribute to Git, which for now I'm not, I might be in the future, but right now it actually services me pretty perfectly. I haven't found any bugs.
Yeah. And but you do contribute to this, to helping people, coming to grips with using Git, especially in terms of GitHub. You are the current maintainer of the hub, the hub wrapper, or the
people call it often the hub gem, which I don't like, because I don't actually prefer to install it as a gem. It's actually a standalone script which runs with Ruby on your system. Doesn't have any dependencies. You just drop it somewhere and you run it. You alias Git to it, so whenever you type Git, it actually goes through this wrapper, which does some extra things on top of Git. But essentially, if it doesn't do anything to a certain command, it just forwards it through to Git. So initially, you don't see any differences, but reading the help reveals that a lot of commands are augmented, and there are some new custom commands that are tailored to GitHub workflow. So I guess it helps people a lot, definitely. Otherwise, I wouldn't invest so much in it, because initially it helped me a lot. I'm not the original author, but I took over maintenance years ago. Since I do so much with open source, it helps me a lot, saves a bunch of keystrokes every day, and it helps me not to context switch too much. Well, not context switch, but actually more application switch. I don't want to be going to a browser often for commands that I'm able to do theoretically from the command line, and which for me actually belong more to the command line. So I'm a person who would rather write a pull request body, all the text and everything, in Markdown in Vim instead of a text area in a browser. And I'm sure a lot of other people would as well, if they knew that was possible. And it is very, very possible with Hub, which you just say Hub pull requests, and then Vim opens up. And when you finish editing, you save that as if you're writing a Git commit, but now you open the pull request. And in no point of this workflow, you have to open the browser.
Nice. And just so I did I understand it correctly? You don't have to use GitHub to use Hub, right?
Hub is integrated in GitHub in a way that it uses GitHub's API. And since we are talking about forking, we are talking about pull requests, these are all concepts that were invented by GitHub.
Yep.
And I haven't used other alternative Git hosts, or I guess that would be Bitbucket now.
Yeah.
And maybe Gitorius or some others, but I'm definitely positive that these same operations wouldn't map well to their systems, or would be named differently, or the API would be different. So Hub is actually useless if we're not talking about Git. If you're hosting your own Git server, then you don't have access to these features like pull requests and forking. They're much more manual. So in this regard, Hub doesn't help you. That's the name Hub comes actually from GitHub.
Yeah.
So it is a tool for GitHub, and there was some discussion from users to make it adapt to other hosts as well. And I say, well, I'm not interested in that, but if somebody wants to contribute that, you're welcome. And nobody stepped forward. It's probably a large project, and it's probable that just other hosts don't have the workflow so evolved and the concept so evolved and well implemented as GitHub does.
And well, just to ask you, why are you at Git Merge?
Well, I wouldn't pass on a Git conference, definitely, especially if it's here in Europe. And I'm also here to get a chance to meet a lot of people from GitHub that I didn't know before or that I knew before, but I want to see them again. I've certainly more than a few friends from here and from GitHub, I mean. Yeah. And I also appreciate the chance to be speaking to some of the Git core contributors and to ask them questions. I was just talking to Pef earlier, and he's amazing to talk to because every problem I have, he has an answer, and sometimes the answer is in a form that, you're looking at it the wrong way or you're trying to do the wrong thing that was not meant to be done in the first place, and Git certainly won't help you with something that was not meant. So a great person to have around to ask, and is also, I believe, as for the first time I met him, he didn't have Twitter, so he had very low online presence and at social networks, so it isn't a person who is easily reachable, except maybe like by email lists or something.
The Git developer email list.
Yeah, which I don't use because they would be probably too hardcore for me to follow since I'm not a Git developer.
And do you have any concrete takeaways that you'll be thinking about, after this conference? A lot more.
We were talking a lot about teaching, especially after a talk from Matthew McCullen. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his last name. From GitHub, he's one of their main official trainers, and we had a round table discussion almost in our free time. We were talking a lot about teaching and was talking a lot about the same talking with other people, and there's certainly a lot of takeaways I have from that. We discussed a lot of very specific things, how to approach hiding difficult concepts when teaching beginners, which they don't need to understand in Git. Yeah. So one of the big problems with Git is that when I say Git is low level, I mean that Git doesn't offer a sufficient abstraction over the node manipulation the graph manipulation operations that its commands represent. So whenever you do, we do merges, we do rebases, we check out stuff, and all these other commands that we use daily, they're essentially just graph manipulation commands over the tree that we have. This is shaped by our commits and the branches and all the objects actually that we create during the typical Git workflow. So my biggest problem with it is it's not on a level that we think about version control, and there were discussions about creating extra layers above that. Some people try to do it via UI tools, make it easier with user interfaces that are easier. Some people try to make it easier with command line interfaces that are easier, that wrap certain commands. So that's when we have EasyGit, we have Git Flow, and we have this command line interfaces that the promise of them is to encapsulate certain operations in a way that it's easier for developers. Even those who understand what's going on internally, still you don't want to be at a level in which is too manual for you and in which doesn't map well to the way we think about things as humans. But the takeaways is that we have to still rely on core Git features, and we still have to rely on using it more directly, because any other third-party solution, any other thing that we try to put in between has potential for, drawbacks, has certain drawbacks over core Git. And one of the biggest drawbacks is that, it's whenever somebody would think of or, try to implement extra would be third-party, would be something that somebody invented. And it would be opinion of a small group of people. And I think it's then risky to try to convince like the majority of the users to use something that is non-standard, essentially.
So the idea is that, okay, when we do training and teach people Git, we still need to teach them, the real Git, and not to rely too much on third-party tools to help us get there.
Yeah, it seems that it's still the best solution right now is to first understand how Git actually works and all its operations, and then teams in a certain company or any team that's working together on a project can then talk about wrapping certain operations in with either custom scripts or using some open source projects that do the same. Like Git Flow is very popular, probably the most popular of what I've seen of layers on Git. And back to the topic of Hub, it does implement a few of the operations you do normally with GitHub, but it doesn't generally. Your Git workflow remains the same, and it just saves you something that you would otherwise use the GitHub web interface for. It allows you to do this from the command line. So in this direction of making Git easier to use, it doesn't solve that. Doesn't solve the problem of Git being hard. It just solves the problem of interacting with GitHub.
Yeah. Okay, so let's round up. Where can people find you, Mislav?
Well, I'm Mislav virtually everywhere.
Yeah.
So on Twitter and on GitHub. And I guess people should check out my GitHub and see various projects that I'm working on, especially if they're from Ruby or JavaScript community. They might be interested.
And you got a couple of great articles published out there. One of them was about when to pull versus rebase.
Yeah, it was a recent one. There's a lot of discussions going on whether merges are better or rebases are better. So I made an article stating the pros and cons of all of them and gave some practical guidelines where you should use one versus the other. And the other popular article was called Git Tips you didn't know about. So I guess if people search for Mislav Git Tips or something, they would find it. It's a collection of random tips for more advanced users that I found very useful in my hacking. And I was noting them down after discovering them and then eventually compiled them in this list. And people liked it and still like it. So it's one of my most visited articles.
Cool. Well, thank you, Mislav.
Thank you.
So I'm standing now here with Thomas Rast. Thomas, tell us who you are, like in the context of Git.
Oh, in the context of Git. I mean, as an ordinary person, I'm a PhD student in computer science, theoretical computer science in Zurich at ETH.
Uh-huh.
So that's the Federal Institute for Technology, is what ETH stands for. I got into Git because sometime during my studies, a guy who's actually, I think, involved in the kernel, but I'm not sure he still is, told me to absolutely try Git. This was probably around 2006 or 2007, so he was very early.
Wow.
And in 2008, when I started my PhD, I finally got around to trying it, or slightly before the PhD, actually, when I wrote the master's thesis. So I think this was one of the first things I tracked in Git was my master's thesis. And then I got into it because I don't remember what the very first patch was. It might have been related to something like the Git add interactive mode has an edit feature. Oh. It's possible that this was my very first patch, but the very first one that hit the list was actually a patch to send email, to convince send email to talk TLS, because the mail server at ETH is running software from a certain big company in Redmond, and it's horrible. And among other things, it refuses to send email unless you send it specifically over TLS. SSL is not a possible option. And that was missing at the time. So basically, even to just implement my own scratches, I first had to patch send email. So I was already at 2 patches, and then it started to get worse from there.
And since then, you've done work on patch edit and any other famous features that we all know?
Famous ones, I guess. Yeah, okay. I mean, it's. I should have a list of this stuff because I always forget all the stuff I did. It's like, for example, I did some work around worddiff, so it's the entire chain of changes around making worddiff configurable and then driving it from GitK. So maybe you've seen this in GitK. You have a little drop down. You can switch to worddiff.
Cool.
So this was some of my doing. I tweaked around in Add Interactive, but I mean the generals were there already. I did some stuff around notes. Johan actually did most of the work there. So notes rewrite, I guess, but no one's actually using it as far as I know. Do you know that feature?
Yeah, I know notes, but I don't know notes rewrite.
So there's like a config option that you can set, and if you do, and you can actually configure it specifically for certain notes refs, because you can have several. You can set a config variable to point to certain notes refs, or just glob them all. And then things like Git rebase will carry over your notes from the old commit to the new commit, so you can keep your notes while you rebase, because that otherwise would be a huge problem, right?
That's nice.
Other things around notes I did was like the option to show multiple notes refs in Git log. So if you put a glob in notes display ref, you can display lots of notes if you want to. I know, I guess the current thing that I also spoke about today briefly was this log-l. So that was the student's idea, I think, back then, based on some hand-wavy intuition of how things should work, I think from Linus, but I might be wrong, by Bo Young in 2010, and that dragged on forever, and I rewrote it once, and it dragged on even longer, since I'm doing this as a hobby, but now it actually hit next, so now you can actually start using it. So it's like, if you think of the history simplification, when you specify a file in a Git log, that basically filters out the history for commits only touching that file. So log-l is taking it one step further and says, and you can say something like, I'm interested in the lines 5 to 10 in file so-and-so.
Yeah.
Or you can even say something like, go looking for a function named this and do the right thing, and it will go and find a function, maybe.
That's really cool.
And it will filter the history and show you the history pertaining to that part of the file, and show you only diffs that actually touch this region. And it works fairly well now in practice. So I think it's almost ready for prime time.
Cool.
But so far we're cooking it to see if there are any further bugs.
Nice. Hopefully by the time I get this episode out there will be a place on the internet where there's a recording of you demonstrating this, right? Because it was filmed, and the GitHub guys will put it online, the videos.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, I'll try to find the link and include that in the show notes to your talk in particular, where you demonstrate this.
But they will probably not be released by that point. You have to be aware of that. So it's pretty sure that it's not going into the next release. So it will be going into the one in 8 weeks or so, the earliest.
Oh well, we move quickly. And I mean, speaking of notes. To go back there for a second, it's kind of a feature that not too many of us, Git users out there have taken too much advantage or appliance of directly. Do you have any examples or things that you use notes for yourself?
So one thing I played with for a while is that, because in Git we have this workflow, if you send a patch and then someone sends some review, you're supposed to list in the second version of the patch that you will send eventually, you're supposed to list what you changed, obviously, because otherwise you're wasting everyone's time. And one thing I played with for a while is that it should be possible to have a note on the commit that basically lists your changelog in terms of these patch revisions, which are otherwise not tracked. And then I actually used this for a while just to keep my personal notes of what I changed. But then it should also be possible to have format patch integrated directly after the triple dash line, which is this part of the patch email that is never read by AM, so it doesn't go anywhere in the resulting history. It's this comment section that you're supposed to use for comments like this, like what you changed. I'm not sure that I ever got integrated. I also stopped using it for that. I have another cute use case that I'm not sure, maybe we can work out something with Scott to make it nicer, but I run a script that, like, regularly, every hour or so, compares the Gmain archive of the Git list with the entire Git history and does some heuristic matching of commits and email. And it formats, it just writes a bunch of notes containing the one notes ref contains the message IDs, which is kind of cute if you have your own mutt or whatever linking to a Git archive. The other one links to Gmain, so it gives you a link to the thread with this message, where the patch came from, highlighted. And I use that one fairly often to go from the commit log to email, but I think it would be cute if we also had something like a mail archive version where you could easily go to the commit from the mail. Other than that, I'm not sure. It's a very versatile thing, but it's also looking for use cases to some extent, and we're not there yet in all cases. For example, merging notes is really silly hard, and it gets worse if you also want to share them over the internet, which like no one would ever want to do, right? So there are some changes required to make it actually a useful feature in collaboration, but you can keep notes.
Okay, so let's just ask you, why are you at Git Merge? Should be obvious by now, but let's hear your opinion on it. Why it's important to be here.
So I greatly enjoyed Git Together 2010, which was back-to-back with the GSOC Mentor Summit in 2010, to which I was invited essentially by Google. They also paid for the travel. Thank you very much, Google. At that time, I was a mentor, so I could easily combine that. And I just had a great time with all the Git folks. So, for example, Pef, who you already interviewed, was also there.
Yeah.
So when the mail came around from Scott saying that he's doing something in Europe, I was all like, yeah, I will sign up, like right now. I think I literally signed up within a few minutes of reading the email. I'm funding it out of my own pocket since I'm doing Git for a hobby only. So it wouldn't have been feasible if it wasn't in Europe. Maybe, I mean, I'm really glad that it's so close to Switzerland.
Yeah.
But I think we should be doing more of these events, especially for the user side. So we heard lots of user perspectives today also. Maybe not your average user, but more like your user that is already tweaking Git to some extent, or scripting around Git, or having some front end. But it's still something important because there's some disconnect there between the Git developers and most of the users. I mean,
and that's an interesting topic in itself. But I wanted to ask you first. Yesterday at the Developer Day, did you have like any key takeaways that you picked up, or the ideas that you got, or things like that?
So for me, definitely the most important topic was this whole should we do GSOC discussion. So for people who don't read the whole list all the time, there was some disagreement, but certain important people felt that Git didn't do so well in past GSOC, especially last year, and should take some time off. And some other people, including me, figured that this is pointless unless you also spend this year learning what you did wrong, or conclude that you will never participate again, but I don't think that anyone really wanted that. So we had a really constructive discussion about how we should continue with GSOC, and I think the agreement so far is that at least among the people who were there yesterday, that we will definitely take part again next year.
Okay, that's
so
good news.
If you're a prospective student, one of the problems with students, I mean, I'm not blaming them for past failures, but it would be really good for us if students started looking into GSOC, say in December or January, at the time when Google is still saying something like, GSOC, no, we're not actually doing that yet. It's not been announced, so who knows? Because you would then spend that time till, what is the submission deadline? Something like, it's recently passed, so it must be in April sometime. Getting yourself acquainted with how Git works and with what kind of topic you might be interested in. And I think that warm-up phase would really help both the student and the Git community to make more out of GSOC.
Okay, good advice.
Despite the dire-sounding topic, it's actually working out fairly well for us, statistically speaking at least.
Yeah, it's good advice for any students out there. I'm sure you're kind of pushing quite a few from your university to go to get in there.
Well, I wish I was, but you only have time for so many things.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure you want this in the podcast, but open source and ETH don't go in the same sentence. So, the one thing that you should promote is that there's a professor in France who's also a regular Git contributor. It's like Mathieu Moy, or Moy, or whatever. And he does some shorter project format spending, I think, 3 weeks on the actual hot phase while they write code, as more of a semester project thingy for students. And that's been working really well, but of course it's also because he drives it and has direct access to the students.
Do you have any concrete areas where you would get students in during summer code?
Well, I mean, one of the takeaways that we had yesterday was that we should probably scrap the entire existing project ideas list, because they're all projects that have not been picked already several times. So we think we should conclude that there are good reasons for that, and we should scrap them and put easier and shorter projects, and also projects consisting of discrete steps that you can do individually, even if one of the steps is currently blocking on something. In the general advice is you look into libgit too, because they still need some fair amount of help. And this is definitely one of the easier areas to both get a slot and then do something really useful, because libgit 2 needs some more love.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to pat my own shoulder here, since I don't actually work on libgit 2. So this is definitely the area of Carlos, for example.
I mean, I can imagine in Git itself that if there were any low-hanging fruits, there would definitely be somebody out there who would have grabbed that by now and done it. If not one of the Git core developers themselves do it because it's easy to do and do it correctly.
I mean, it's to some extent it's not true that things that should be easy to do are always easy to do within Git itself, because the code base has grown quite a few corners that you don't really want to go into without the gas mask. So it's really for a student who just newly started and wants to do something big, it can be really intimidating. So if you want to fix some small thing, it's usually not that bad, especially since our history is really good. But on the other hand, if you want to understand an entire subsystem and how all its parts fit together and what breaks if you pull at what corner, that can be really hard, because we don't comment code very well, and also because some of the subsystems are so entwined with each other or with themselves that it can be really difficult to move any parts. It's like playing Jenga to some extent.
Interesting to know. So, are there any things that you want to promote, or places where people can find you online?
Well, me, I mean, when you just Google for my name, there are only 2 Thomas Rusts to my knowledge.
Okay.
But the homepage I have is pretty useless. I do occasionally push interesting things to GitHub these days. So my GitHub account is TRAST, so Trust.
Okay.
So, for example, right now you would find a draft version of a Git support for log-l, so you can actually view the same thing. I mean, it's exactly the same history, but you can view it in Git, which is very helpful. Other than that, I mean, I hang out on the list. I hang out on IRC. I would really recommend that. Also, I mean, prospective, say, GSOC students or people who want to get to know the code base, come to git-devel on Freenode, where some of the developers hang out. Not nearly enough, but we can usually give some advice. So
the regular Freenode Git channel is for users, and the Git-devel is more for developers.
Try to enforce that.
All right, good to know.
It's much more quiet in Git-devel also. I mean, there can be weeks of no activity even, but people do hang out there.
Okay, Thomas, thank you very much.
No problem.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Once again, you can find the show notes on links.gitminutes.com/10. You can post feedback or comments directly under the show notes, or you can send me an email. That's feedback@gitminutes.com. You can follow the show on Twitter or Google+, where you'll be notified of any new episodes, or you can subscribe to the RSS feed. You can also find us in iTunes, Stitcher Radio, in the Miro Guide, and in the Windows Podcast Directory. Thanks to Google for powering the podcast feed with Blogger and FeedBurner, and Audacity is the free open-source audio editing tool that I use for putting the show together. And a big thanks to danosongs.com for providing free music to the show. Until next time, thank you for listening.